The world is different now more than ever, which is a stunning observation. I am well aware of this. But it's important to talk about the complications that so much change has created for not just Gen Z, but just young people in general going about our lives and our professional careers. So keeping everything simple, let's dive into that. Welcome to the Keeping Everything Simple podcast. I'm your host and fellow student, Michael Klukas, and on this show, we boil down complicated topics into simple, actionable tips. And we're going to lead in with the first segment of the show, the complications. So we all tend to want similar things. We want work that we don't hate. We want to have to not stress about finances, to feel that sense of purpose in what we do, and yet we complicate so many things, and that's in a variety of different ways, but we really do complicate so much in our lives. So let's address that. First of all, it's important to understand that finding common ground can be tricky, but it's not impossible. It's just someone has to take that first step. And this is especially important if you are working in a space, in a career where you might be part of a multi-generational workforce, which I have a video about that, which you can go check out. But there's a lot of different generations in the workforce right now. And so finding common ground is super, super important, but it's hard because someone has to take the first step to do it. And I'm going to emphasize, when I say someone, it's not always going to have to be the older generation. Sometimes we have to be the ones to take that first step, but also it's not exactly fun to do so. And there's always this idea of back in my day where anyone that looks back on their past will remember it in a more positive light more often than not. And that can create this kind of divide where we're trying to address a topic that they probably dealt with in their own style back in their day, but it doesn't quite look the same with how much has changed in the current world. And that's why that's the first complication, because if we're trying to reach that common ground, if we are shifting the narrative and everyone's approaching it but never trying to see someone else's point of view, then we're going to have a very hard time actively making progress together. That's why I emphasize the stories that we may be telling, they more often than not, will probably be very similar. Where, hey, guess what? Dating as a teenager probably was just as confusing in the 90s, but it was probably just as confusing 20, 30, 40 years ago as it is today. There might be a bit more complications, but the root of it's still pretty much the same. Finding out your career probably was very similar back then in terms of, well, I don't want to do this, or I don't know if I want to do that field. I don't know if I want to follow in my parents' footsteps. I don't know if I want to go do my own thing. There probably still was that same pressure of, hey, what are you doing with your life? What's next for you after you graduate high school? Who knows? Who really knows? But that's, again, why it's so important that we try to find common ground here. But that's just the first complication. So let's move on to the second one. Now, in a time of rapid change, we forget who's done what. Now, that sounds a little odd, so let me explain a bit further. Experience matters, but it cannot be touted as this kind of end-all, be-all. So a great example is a lot of articles that you'll see online right now that talk about how Gen Z is the hardest generation to work with, or how we are very unprepared for the workforce, and how millennials are being sought out as the middle management, as leadership team members, because they have the experience that's tried, tested, and true. Granted, that makes sense to a degree. I'm not saying that for myself as a member of Gen Z, I feel that I'm unable to lead a team. I've led a team. And at the same time, I also understand that there is a good reason to have someone older in these types of roles. But when we forget who's done what, we can put an overemphasis on that experience rather than new talent being brought in. And this is where seniority matters, but so does who the expert is. So a best example I have of this is, and this is a generalization, a very, very broad generalization. It doesn't fit for everybody. I wouldn't generally put someone who is in their 70s, 60s, 80s as the social media manager. Again, generalization here. But I would probably imagine that someone who is in their 20s and early 30s might have a better handle on what the latest trends might be or what potential up and coming platforms and trends might be. And that's because of who's dialed into what. And that is taking into consideration, again, who the expert is, not just where the seniority lies. Because, of course, there is that 60-year-old who is dialed in, who is able to stay on top of every big trend that occurs, and they are doing a great job. Just as there's the 20-year-old who has sworn off social media because it affects their mental health, and that's perfectly valid. But it's always important to understand who the expert is so you understand who you are asking. And that leads us then to like the other piece of that puzzle. If we forget the value that someone inherently brings to a role, to a team, then we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot there, because we aren't able to fully recognize what they are bringing to the table that's really elevating the team's ability to produce results or just the relationship they have in general. Everyone has something that they are bringing. Dave Ramsey puts it like this in terms of Gen Z, where he says we're kind of like a divided generation where half of us are fantastic, but then the other half of us are kind of sucky. And I'm not going to say that it's correct or that it's wrong. I would just say that it's an understandable point of view. But at the same time, I want to emphasize that we all still bring value in some capacity. The important part is that we align the value that we do bring with a position, with an area of expertise that's really going to bring that out of us. So there has to be a good, we call it product market fit if you're trying to sell a product, but I would call it person company fit, or person culture fit. You have to find the right spot for you to be in. And that means actually putting in work around it. But that's what makes it a complication, is the fact that if we forget who's done what, we also forget then who is capable of what. Real quickly, if you're watching this on YouTube and you are enjoying it, make sure that you do like this episode of the Keeping Everything Simple podcast and subscribe down below. Hit the notification bell so you know every time that we post a video. If you are listening to us on a podcast app of choice, make sure that you leave us a 5-star rating. It would help me out so much and promotes the show to other people just like you. I greatly appreciate it. It really does mean a lot. But with that, let's dive right back in. Now, the third complication is the fact that by trying to make life easier, we have also inadvertently made life harder, which I know sounds kind of weird, but stay with me on this. Ultimately, we've kind of put the paradox of choice on steroids. Just like a completely roided out version of the paradox of choice, where we should improve the lives of those who come after us. Yes, we have also created so many different choices now that it can be very overwhelming unless you've set your foot down on a path and have actually chosen a direction to go into, that it really does take a whole lot of self-understanding and discernment to say, all right, I know that my life is easier than my parents. My life is easier than my grandparents. But at the same time, I got to make sure that I'm going in a direction that actually takes advantage of the fact that my life is easier today than it was or would have been for someone 20, 30, 40 years ago. But at the same time, like I said, paradox of choice creates so much that we also then have the end of the spectrum where we have too much leisure activities as well, which we know can be a bad thing. And if you saw WALL-E, I mean, like, actually got the messaging behind that, so much convenience took away mobility. It took away that freedom to have the opportunity to do things, to actively want to go create things, to actively have that drive to take responsibility for our lives and create change. But again, because we are making so many rapid advancements right now, we still do add a lot more leisure to the world as it exists because we want to make life easier. But at the same time, hard work or some hard aspects I do believe need to exist. But that's what makes the paradox of choice then also a complication, is that there's so many ways we can go about it that there's no true best route in my opinion. It's just the best route for you. And that's something that you have to figure out, and that can also be a lot. So comment down below if you're watching this on YouTube. How do you feel that you're bringing your best self forward in the current situation, either in work or in life? Because again, everything is situational, and we have to find the best situation for ourselves and create the best situation for ourselves. So let me know down in the comments below here on YouTube. And so, of course, complications can inevitably create conflict. So that's the next segment of the show that we're diving into. Here's the conflicts. So by not allowing ourselves to see the shared traits or shared ideals that we have, we will end up just endlessly butting heads for no reason at all, or over things that truly, and I mean truly, do not matter. So the first point here is that we have the us versus them mentality. And this is something that will inherently hinder your ability to navigate the workforce and really thrive, because if it is generation versus generation, there's always going to be a narrative of, oh wow, this generation can't handle this. There's always a conversation like, oh wow, look, there's the snowflakes. Oh wow, look, there's the completely off the wall, what is it called? The conspiracy theorists, essentially. Yep, that's the word. But there's so much conflict that gets written up about, when in your daily life, there's probably less of that than we are willing to give credit to. And that's because negativity sells. We have that negativity bias. That's inherent to our evolution. But it doesn't have to be us versus them. It doesn't have to be generation versus generation. And then it goes on further, where it doesn't have to be the employee versus the lead, where if you are in leadership, and I want you to if you're watching this on YouTube, get really close here. If you are a leader in any capacity, it is your responsibility to your team. And I'm going to emphasize that again. It's the responsibility to take care of your team, and of course, take care of your responsibilities and the results you need to create. But the first way that you do that is taking care of your team. Because if your entire team walks out on you one day, where's your job going to do? What are you going to be able to do? And that's why I'm going to emphasize that. So it's, again, the us versus them mentality that comes in, where some people feel like, oh, because they're in that leadership position, they go on a power trip and they're like, oh, you guys have to do exactly what I say. I'm going to micromanage the absolute, I'm not going to swear on this. I'm trying to keep this family friendly. You have to do everything to the T by my word. And it's just a bad experience all around. And so that's why you have to be able to see that it is a team effort, and not just this, oh, I have to be able to tell them what to do and they have to follow exactly what I say because I have the title. That's not how it works. And that truly should not be what we are expecting. And then there's just the overall people versus people. And this is what you can refer to as your tribe. This is what you can refer to as just like the things that you are affiliated with, your fandoms even. But there's this, again, emphasis that with negativity bias, with being negativity what sells the 24-hour news cycle, we have to make sure that we aren't falling victim to just these overgeneralizations of like, oh, wow, it is, of course, me versus that person because XYZ on other side of the country and another side of the world. We just have to make sure that we are critically thinking about what our values and reasonings are, so that way we don't make overgeneralizations for ourselves and be like, oh wow, of course I align with this because I read one news article about it, rather than, wow, I align with this value because this is what I was raised to believe, and I got to challenge it a lot while I was in university, while I was starting out my life as a young adult, and I've been able to see that I don't agree with all of it. I'm going to take some parts of it, but here's the core value. That's what the whole struggle of people versus people comes down to, is the fact that we don't critically think enough about, okay, what is the actual root issue? What's the root of the story here? So we have to be cautious of the us versus them mentality. And now the point 2 is confirmation bias. And we have to be super careful about this one, because if we only surround ourselves with people who will affirm everything that we say, we are going to get a very skewed version of the world. And that's not something that's going to help anyone out. It truly will not. Because essentially it is an information silo. So I don't know if you've heard this term before, but an information silo is when you are only taking in a certain type of information that confirms what you already believe, and you are neglecting any other contradictory articles, sightings, news, whatever it is, and you have siloed yourself into your group, your belief, and that's where you get confirmation bias. Consider it like a social media feed where you have blocked, you have hidden the comments of anyone that disagrees with you. You have essentially created a silo. And this also becomes very problematic if we lack critical thinking. So the ability to, again, examine what we are inherently led to believe and why we are led to believe it, and hold two opposing ideas at the same time, that's super important. And that's where critical thinking comes in. And I'm not saying that we're unable to think critically. I'm just saying that we have to practice it on a more daily basis to kind of flex that muscle, because if you don't use it, you will lose it. It's the same thing as like learning a language. So for someone who may have been fluent in one language when they were younger, they may still be able to pick up pieces here and there, but if they never used it from like 5 years old to 20 years old, then they will not be able to speak it as they once did. And that's the same thing with critical thinking. We have to be able to actively use it to make the most of it. And that will help with the confirmation bias, because we will be able to more actively question our own assumptions and not just assume that everything that we read is fact. We'll be able to dive deeper into the sources. We'll get down to the core material. But it's all about not allowing confirmation bias to generate conflict because we didn't decide to take those couple extra minutes to find the sources and just verify everything, and that an article wasn't all based upon an alleged report, which happens a lot. That's news, unfortunately. All right, moving on. The next point here is that we go for something that I term the low blows, which is it's very, very easy to complain about kind of one subset of people or one trait. So again, this is taking Dave Ramsey's kind of opinion on Gen Z. It's like, well, he refers to it as you don't let crazy in the door. Where, and this is a part that I do agree with, is the fact that if you are having to fire a lot of people, you're having high turnover, then there's either an issue with the company or an issue with your hiring process. Both can be true at the same time as well. Again, not really a paradox, but it's just an avid fact. But ultimately, if we're going for low blows, we would be essentially taking that one subset if we see like a similar trait in people and thinking, oh, this is my experience. This would be anecdotal, but I'm going to say, and this is like for the article that had Gen Zers bringing their parents into an interview. It's like, wow, a lot of people must be bringing their parent into an interview. Wow. It must just be Gen Z who is unable to actively get into the workforce because they need to rely on their parents to help them out with everything. Until I saw that article, I have never heard of anyone bringing a parent into an interview. A parent might have helped them prep, but bringing someone in? That was a new one. But again, that becomes a low blow because I didn't dig deeper into it. Aside from, well, here's the article. Here's what the survey was, and based on what it showed in that article in itself, it wasn't a super large survey by any means. And so it's a low-hanging fruit for them to kind of grab at and be like, oh, wow, okay, this is the statement we're going to run with because it makes somewhat sense and it is eye-catching and has that negativity that we need just to make it kind of stick, make it clickable. And that's why we have to make sure that we aren't just going for the lowest common denominator. Because I can say the same thing, because we know that there's the term okay boomer that came into existence where there's a lot of outdated thoughts that our older cohorts were kind of pushing for, but at the same time the world changed, and so it wasn't going to work in the same way that they remembered. And that's okay. But the lowest common denominator would be that some of them would be very, very loud about their point of view and not willing to change. But then I've met plenty of them that were willing to. And so it becomes very situational and has to be placed in context, because that's where the second piece of this comes in, is in terms of low blows, quote unquote. We don't spend time talking enough, and arguing louder doesn't necessarily make you right. And so this is, again, where those lowest common denominators are also the ones who inadvertently somehow got a hold of a megaphone, and they're the ones standing on top of the roof and just screaming. You know, now I think about it, the megaphone could just be your phone, because it's very easy to post a video. I'm getting off topic here. But it's all about just not making sure that we are allowing what might be a subset to determine the larger picture of everyone else. So I have to caution you about that, because that's where a conflict will come in, is if we are making these generalizations because of one group, we are ignoring the other 95% of people who wouldn't go about the same something the same way. So that's why I encourage you to really examine those concerns here. So the conflicts of the us versus them mentality, confirmation bias, to make sure that you're not siloing yourself in information that only confirms what you think, and then going for low blows, because that doesn't do anyone any benefits. And with that, though, all types of conflict we will experience in work and in our life, we can still thrive. And ultimately, these are 3 ways that I personally use them in my own life. So we don't need to do anything crazy here. And these are simplified ideals and the simplified actions that really do help out so much. And this is the 3rd segment of the show here, where the point 1 is that you don't want to assume negative intent. And that is easier said than done, because, again, negativity bias, it's very easy for us to want to kind of spiral it into this depressive thought where someone, and this is very, very kind of distinct to texting culture. So we don't call on the phone as much. And so if we get someone that just texts it, I'm going to use the example of okay. If someone texts out okay, spelled out completely, OKAY, then we're generally like, all right, sweet. I'm going to check that mental box off that we're good. If someone texts okay, that one's a little bit iffy. And I know you guys know what I'm talking about here. But when you get K, just K, and you might be in the middle of maybe a tense conversation, you know you messed up. You know you got to backtrack and see where you went wrong. But the worst part is you get K, period. Oof, you're out. You're done. Go get a breather, come back to it, but you know. But ultimately, that's something that I realized is not everyone notices that the same way. Where this is very, I think, representative of like emailing, where we don't text the same way that we email, but for some of us, we do, because we use it as kind of this quick form of communication. And that can inadvertently sound very bad. Because if my boss says, hey, I need to see you in my office for a couple minutes, it may just be them following up on something that they asked me to do yesterday, or them giving me a new project. Nothing bad comes about it. But I will assume negative intent unintentionally. And this is bad. It's unintentional, where I will be like, oh wow, okay, so did I do something to let me check my to-do list? Did I get them that project? Did I make a mistake somewhere? Let me double check all my work now. And then am I in trouble? Am I getting fired? And it's not good. And I know that's not a only me occurrence, just because it's something that is all dependent on what you're growing into, because communication is so vital to our success that if we always assume negative intent whenever an interaction doesn't go as smoothly as we thought it would, or maybe someone's a little bit more curt with us than we would have liked or would have like noticed otherwise, it may just be completely unrelated. They could have been having they could have gone off a bad phone call and they're slowly coming down from it, and we asked them a question at the wrong time. And it's nothing to do with us. So the emphasis here is that for simplified action, don't assume negative intent. Try to assume positive intent to the best of your ability, and then unless proven otherwise, go about your day. That will help you out so much to really thrive in your life and in work. Trust me on that one. And then the next simplified action here is that you want to fail fast and learn faster with other people, because there's the saying, if you want to go far, or you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go with others. And I'm emphasizing this because if you're able to learn from your mistakes in a much faster pace than anyone else, you're going to be in a much better position than the others around you who may have been a couple years ahead, but you will have learned from their mistakes and you learn from your own mistakes because you are able to fail quickly, find out what you can improve, find out how you can improve it with some extra guidance as well, and then leapfrog over what would have been a potential hurdle and get to the next checkpoint that much faster. Man, I really like video game references. But it's so important that we are able to kind of internalize that action, because it's not fun to fail. It's not fun to realize, oh, wow, I made a mistake on this report and it got seen by my boss and now I'm embarrassed about it. But ultimately it's, okay, wow, that's not good. How can I rectify this? How can I correct this as quickly as possible and make sure I don't do it again? How am I going to change my process to make sure I'm double checking my work? I've made so many errors at work in the past couple of weeks here that I'm just looking at myself thinking, what am I missing? Am I too tired? Do I need to just pay better attention? And it's come down to, okay, let me just double check the important parts that I know will help eliminate these errors down the line. And that's me failing fast, because I can't spend time dwelling on it. Instead, it's spending time dwelling on the process I'm going to do to fix it and not just the problem itself. So that's my encouragement for you there. And the next point then is to point 3 of simplified actions. Own up to your faults, but please do not be a doormat. And I emphasize this, please do not be someone that feels like you have to take the fault of everyone on around you, because I emphasize taking responsibility. And there's a thing called extreme ownership, where you are truly owning up to everything that you could be responsible for, but do not let yourself become a doormat that gets walked all over because someone else needs you to take the fall for them. That's not what this means. It is owning up to the fact that you will have your shortcomings. You will have points where you will, again, need to fail fast and learn. And you will have points where you can just improve overall and learn a new skill. But you just have to recognize what your shortcomings are and how you can improve them. Just don't allow those shortcomings to be a source of, apathy, where you let someone walk all over you because, like, well, you don't know how to do this. Let me just take this from you. It's like, no, I don't know how to do this yet. Can you teach me how to do this so I can be more valuable, so I can be more helpful, but just so I can also learn and feel more confident. And then the final point here is that don't take yourself too seriously. This is my secret little tip for you guys. And this is like, I wasn't going to include this one, but honestly, do not take yourself too seriously. It really opens up your life and work to be a lot more fun and to have more just enjoyment in it if you aren't trying to write this narrative that you are some, super high up person that needs to have everything done one particular way to get the most out of your life and most out of your day. But no, just don't take yourself overly seriously. Have fun, poke fun at yourself, because that is one of the biggest indicators that you are settling in, that you are finding a more secure and stable spot to be in, because that that you might poke fun of yourself, but that's just it. It's just for fun. It's not the truth. It's not something that you have to be so overly concerned about, but be able to let yourself be humble and just enjoy some of the process. And ultimately, choosing to thrive in the workplace, choosing to thrive in your own life is coming down to your mindset and having this openness to new experiences, ideas, and lessons. And it's a choice to make, so there has to be intentionality behind it. So despite how much we might have conflict, we can also choose change for the better and just improve things around us. So that's the note I'm going to end it on for you guys. But with that, if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. It helps me out so much. If you're listening to us on a podcast app of choice, make sure that you leave us a 5-star rating. That just stokes my ego, makes me happy. And I appreciate it so much. It really does help the show grow and be promoted to other people just like you. But with that, I hope you have an amazing day. You amazing people. Keeping everything simple. I will see you all in the next episode. Go out there and do great things.